Thank you for joining us today on Positively Charged Biz. We are here to motivate, inspire, and support our listeners as they write their life stories. We are a proud founding member of the Real Disrupt Podcast Collaborative, and you can check out more awesome podcasts at realdisrupt.com. Good day, everyone. I hope you are having a positive and productive day. I'm Laura Brandeo, and today we have a very special guest. We first met a few years ago at a local Chamber of Commerce women's event, and I was immediately drawn into her personal journey that was filled with courage and a leap of faith. I would like to introduce you all to Joan Herrmann. She is a radio host, publisher, author, columnist, and a motivational speaker on the topics of transition and self-empowerment. Joan Herrmann is the founder of a multimedia communications company and creator, host, and produces Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life's radio show and podcast, Conversations with Joan, which airs on New York's AM 970, The Answer. It streams on iHeartRadio and is posted on major podcast platforms. Joan also publishes a monthly digital magazine, 24/7, which is distributed to hundreds of thousands worldwide. Her guest and magazine contributors list reads like a who's who of the most influential and inspirational people in the world. Joan has been featured in Forbes, on BBC, and other print and broadcast media. Her recent speaking engagement includes keynotes to the New Jersey Governor's Conference for Women, the New Jersey Association of Women Business Owners, and the Power of Positive Medicine with Dr. Bernie Siegel. She was a voice for the American Lung Association's Taking a Breath for Women's campaign. Joan, on Positively Charged, we like to start at the beginning. So please tell us, why did you start Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life?
Well, Laura, thank you so much for having me on your show. It is a real pleasure to be here with you today. And this work started about 12 years ago now. I was in my early 40s, and after spending 17 years at a stay-at-home, work-from-home, and in a limited capacity, role, I had lost sense of who I was. I was a college graduate, and after college, my career was really taking off. I was doing public relations for a Fortune 500 company, and I really had a promising career, but in the back, it was, basically the way I was raised, that I was going to devote myself to my family. So I married my college sweetheart. We were young when we got married. We were 24. I worked for a few years and then had my first son. And I chose to leave my full-time job and work out of the house. And I then had a second son. And like I said, I spent the next 17 years devoting myself completely to my husband and my two children. And so what had happened when I was in my early 40s, and I like to say I looked in the mirror one day. It was a gradual progression, but I really did start to look at myself in the mirror and say, who is this person? And what I had allowed to have happen to myself over those years was, as I describe it, I really became less of a woman to my husband and more of hired help, someone that could be replaceable. And everything, like I said, was totally for the family. And when I had this aha moment, I really decided that I needed to reconnect with the person that I was. And so I had this crazy idea, and I call it crazy because my background was in public relations, but it was not media relations. I was doing employee newsletters and annual reports. I didn't have any experience with radio, but I had this idea in my early 40s to create a radio show that would be about change, because I knew that I needed to get my head in the game and figure out what I thought of myself, what I thought I could achieve. And I thought if I started a radio show, that would just be a connection between other women who were feeling the way I was and people who had the answers. And I came up with this brand called Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. And so I started to work toward developing a radio show and learning everything that I could about it. And as I was doing that, my husband of 23 years wasn't really on board with it because I was changing the dynamics of our relationship. It wasn't 1,000% about him. I was starting to put some emphasis on myself, and he wasn't liking it. It just wasn't something that he was used to. So as I was moving forward and trying to develop this brand, what had happened quite literally in one weekend, my mother had a stroke on a Saturday, and the day before, my sister was diagnosed with a brain tumor.
Oh, my
and
goodness.
I believe that was really a precipitator of my mom's stroke, I think, because I had already lost a brother when he was 14. So this was, my mom having to deal with another sick child. So my sister's diagnosed with a brain tumor that we later on learned was a metastasized lung cancer, a stage 4 lung cancer. And my mom had a massive stroke, and I'd already lost my father in 2001. So this was my immediate family. This was the remaining family. And so over the course of the next 6 months, my mother is dying, my sister is dying, my marriage is collapsing, and my oldest son left for college. My mom then died, and my sister then died.
Wow.
So in a 6-month period, my mom died, my sister died, my 23-year marriage ended, and my oldest son left for college. And so I was no longer a mother as I knew it. I was no longer a wife. I was no longer a daughter. I was no longer a sister. So I was already having a crisis of my self-awareness. And now you add to this, I had no idea who I was or what I would do, how I would be, supporting of myself, because we did go on to divorce, and how I would take care of my children. I had been out of the workforce for all of those years. So the thing that saved me quite literally was that little radio show that I started called Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life, having no idea what was to come in my life, that I would go through all of these challenges and all of this change that I needed to navigate. And so I clung to that radio show, and as the guests started to get bigger and bigger, it was really, I was creating this brand looking for the answers that I needed because I was experiencing self-esteem issues, divorce, death, building a company, grief, parenting. I got a PhD in life in 6 months. And so everything that I've then created with the brand and the radio show has been from that dark period in my life. So when I say, the student was ready, the teachers came, that's an example of what I lived. And so I'm hoping to bring that out to other people. And so that's where all of this came from. And so as I was developing the radio show and the brand, for me, it's a PBS special. That's what I want it to be, content-driven, resource-driven, just to help people get through whatever it is they're navigating and to give them tools, even if they're in a positive place, so that they can grow and be the best that they can be. And you mentioned the magazine. I launched that as well because I had experience in that, and I was working with, the greatest New York Times authors, and I started to ask them, would you write for me? And everyone said yes. And so I started to publish this digital magazine. And so we just celebrated our 10th anniversary last year. We're now in our 11th year, 2020. And, that's really how this all came to be. I like to say God has a sense of humor, but he plucked a middle-aged woman from a small town in New Jersey, gave me this idea, and I just ran with it.
Wow, that's quite a story there, Joan. So thank you for sharing that. So let me understand the timeline. So when did you start the radio show in contrast to when that dark 6 months of the marriage, falling apart and the family situations with the illnesses? Where's the timeline there?
Okay, so it was around 2008 when I was starting to have these thoughts of, who am I? What can I do? I was very sad. I was at that point where, and I think a lot of women get to this point, I didn't wear makeup. I just put sweats on because who cared? I was disconnected from my husband because, like I said, I think I stopped being a woman to him. I started being a mother, a caregiver. And so that was where I started to realize those issues. It was in 2009, early 2009, that I had the idea for a radio show, and I had to start to figure out, how to go about doing that. The show premiered on July 8th, 2009. And so I was working on, from July 8th, 2009 through the fall, I was having marital issues, but I was building the radio show. It was the weekend of February 13th, 2010. The Friday, my sister was diagnosed with the tumor. The Saturday, my mother had her stroke. The Sunday, we learned about my sister's tumor being lung cancer. So then the illnesses progressed. So my mom passed away August 15th, 2010. 2 weeks later, my son left for school. That December 2010, my husband moved out. January 2011, my sister passed away. And that was really where, in that fall, right? That winter after my sister passing, that was when I was really broken. I mean, there were times where I was literally thinking about how I could kill myself and it wouldn't hurt my children. And it was because I was so sad, I was so alone, but I was also afraid. I didn't know how to live.
Right.
I had no idea how to move forward, how I would do, with no family, with no viable means of support, with nothing. And so, and also just to back up, it was that May of 2009, I incorporated a company under which I would produce the radio show and so forth. And then it was the fall of 2010 that I premiered the magazine. So it was almost a year later the magazine came out. So the 6 months were really, from August to January where all the losses took place.
Wow.
But before that, we were dealing with all of the crisis.
And it's
so it was a very short period of time.
So interesting when you realize what you said about, it was almost like you had to start on that road in order to get you through all of that dark that was coming. Right? It was almost like the universe was setting it up to start to teach you some lessons, start to put you on a path. And it almost, and of course you can kind of look back, and it's always 20/20 vision when you look back and you say, oh, that makes sense. That now I understand why some of those things started to happen in order to get me on the new path that I needed to go on. So interesting when you look backwards, right? And you see that.
Exactly. Because that's exactly how I describe it to people. And even to take it further back, everything that I did in my professional career before I stayed home gave me the tools to do what I needed to do now. So everything, and I never thought like this, Laura. I was just one who went through life blindly, lived every day, took care of my kids, took care of the house. I never was a deep thinker. I never looked for meaning in anything. It was what I went through that changed everything about my life. I look back, like you're saying, and I realize everything was in perfect order for me, whether I liked it or not. It was for the growth I needed so that I could, in essence, wake up and start living my life and start to understand that, there's more to just trotting through every day
right.
and waiting to go to sleep at night. There's so much more to that. And I have become a true believer because every guest that was sent to me prior to the illness of my mother and sister and after that gave me all the tools. When I was in deep grief, I interviewed David Kessler, who worked on the grief model with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. When I was trying to find out, how to build a business, I interviewed people like Jack Canfield and Mark Victor Hansen and looking for spiritual guidance, I interviewed
right.
Joel Osteen. They all came. So when I said, I was the student, I know what to ask because I know what I need to know. And I think that's why all of this has worked so well.
Wow, that's fascinating. And it really is so interesting when you realize that what comes to us is for a reason. And we just have to be open to accept and to learn. Because although it may not make sense at that moment, it probably will make sense in the future. So that really is deep learning and deep thinking. But I'm a big believer in that myself. I honestly am 100% on board with that. And I really do think we need to always remain open for what's coming into our life because they may be lessons that again, they might not make sense now, but it will make sense to you when you need it. So I love that. Thank you. And another thing, you certainly touched on certain things that even myself, as although I'm a business lady and all that kind of stuff, I have to tell you there's a topic that you don't hear many women speak about, but yet whenever I bring it up, everyone says, yeah, absolutely. No one really speaks about that, and it is a big part. And both of us have two grown boys, right? Men. We have two grown men. And I know that for myself, and I think from what you were saying, I think you would agree, there is definitely almost a sense of loss when your children grow up. There is that moment in time, no matter how successful you are in business, no matter what else is happening. You could be, myself, I'm happily married for a very long time, but there is a moment in time when your children become adults where you kind of say, now what? Like, okay, that role is over. And we all know we'll always be moms and all that, but it's different. It is different. And I think there is major discussion that needs to be placed on the transition of when we no longer are mom taking care of every single thing, and now we're more of just a supporting role. We're not the main role anymore, right? Our kids have grown up. So what are your thoughts on that? Because it sounds like you also experienced going through that transition.
And I think that's probably what led to a lot of the soul searching that I was having, because at the time my kids were in high school, and when they were younger, and I want to just add, I made the decision to be a stay-at-home mom, and for my kids it was a great decision. They're amazing young men, but whatever a woman's decision is, whether it's to stay at home, to stay full-time in the workforce, whatever it is, I just recommend finding the balance, and that's something I didn't do. I didn't hold on to that piece of me with self-care, with, remembering who I was. And that's the advice that I give to everyone. And I just wanted to, start with that, because no matter what role you have as a woman, you have to remember who you are, and you have to take care of yourself. Because if your bucket is empty, you can't do for anyone, whether it be your boss, a husband, children, anyone. So that's just something very important to start with. But yes, I agree with you. I think a lot of my soul searching began because when they were younger, I was very involved with them in school, president of the PTA, the whole thing. I dove in. But when they were in high school, I backed away. And whether I chose to or not, they were going to push me away. But I did. I backed away, and I let them have their space and their time. And it did. It left a lot of free time for wondering, all those what ifs. What could I have accomplished if I had whatever? And I do believe that is really what began the journey for me. And I'm glad that this time, for whatever reason, because I had said this over the years to my husband, like, I'm lost, I'm not happy, but our dance was I would complain, he would listen halfway, and then I would just go back to the routine. It was the last time when I said, I'm not happy. I need to figure something out, and I'm going to do this for myself. I think he was waiting for me to go back to, the old Joan. And I didn't this time. And something inside me told me, this is really for my survival. I need to do this. And I didn't back down. And it cost me a lot. I mean, it cost me the marriage, because probably at any point, if I said, I'm not going to do this, we would have just gone back and everything would have been fine. But for the first time in 23 years, I said, I need everyone to do something for me. And that was really when everything changed. But as women, we're so devoted to our children and our family. When that is no longer the case, and I described it when my son left for college, I even say like I was no longer a mom.
Right.
In my head, that's how I'm describing it. So it's a loss that we have to grieve. Mm-hmm. It is a loss. They're still there, but they're there in a different capacity. We don't control their lives. They don't do what we say. We can advise, I don't know how it is with daughters. I know with sons, sometimes I feel like, Charlie Brown's school teacher. They hear the wah-wah, but I don't know if it's fitting in, but I keep saying it.
And you have to give them up when they get married because you have to hand the boys over. Absolutely.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important point that you've made, Laura, because it is a loss. And I think what it does, it gives women the opportunity. Usually when you get to that point, you're probably in your 40s, your early 40s, around there, and give or take. It gives you an opportunity then to say, what about me? And that's why so many amazing things are happening for women in that second half of life. And they call it that, for a reason. It's a rebirth, I believe. And we're young. Listen, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, I don't think you're ever too old
I agree.
to accomplish. I just wrote a blog last week because it was my birthday. I turned 57. And I said to myself, I wrote this blog about, like a fine wine, we get better with age. I'm wiser now than I ever was. I'm not looking to retire. I'm going to ride this out for as long as I can breathe. And the reason is, because I'm not buying into ageism, and that's what I hope people don't do. If someone tells you, listen, my kids tease me on a daily basis, you're senile, this, that, I just laugh at them and say, yeah, okay. It's what you believe. If you think you're old, you'll be old. But if you believe that this is your time and you can do some really wonderful things, I think the sky's the limit, and I say go for it. And I encourage everyone to look for what will bring them joy and help them to refire this part of their life.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. And you're right. It is a rebirth because you're focused on something different, right? Because no matter what, like I said, I've been in the business world the whole time, but when you're mom, that's a big focus. That family piece when you're raising children is a big focus. And when the kids go to college or they graduate college, they move out, all of a sudden it is kind of liberating of, okay, what's the next journey? Where do we go? And that actually leads me to the next question. So, okay, we've got the timeline. I'm understanding where, you're like, I really want to do this. Tell me about the execution. I'm curious of, okay, now here you were a stay-at-home mom, and you're like, I'm gonna go get a radio show. What did you do? I'm curious on the execution at that point.
One of the things I've learned about myself that I had no idea that I was good at, and I like to call this, I can spin gold out of straw. I have gotten very good at building relationships and maximizing opportunities. And I think that those are two areas that people in business really don't pay enough attention to. The first one about, building relationships, I see a lot of people that do what I call a hit and run. They'll meet someone or they'll join an organization or whatever it is they'll do, and they try to get very quickly what they can from that person, and then they move on to someone else. And I think that is deadly in business. I think, to really succeed, you have to collaborate and build strong, lasting relationships. Like you said, Laura, I met you years ago.
I think that was like 16. I think it was like 2016.
Right.
Yeah.
It was a while. And, we've cultivated a relationship. It could have been all about, what can I get from Laura, and Laura saying, what can I get from Joan? But we didn't do that.
No.
And I see a lot of people that do that, and I think that that's a big mistake. And the other thing is, not leaving opportunities on the table. I always tell people to maximize whatever you can, and not in a bad way, but if you're doing something, go with it and really make it work for you. People I just think they leave so much. But to get back to your question, so I started building the radio show, and so I had a public relations background, which gave me, it gave me an edge because I knew how to write my own press release. I knew how to do publicity. So I was able to garner publicity for the show. In the early days, I was interviewing local people, and one day I said to myself, I'm going to just send interview requests out to, whomever I can think of that's the leader in the field. And so earlier I mentioned Joel Osteen, and I sat down one day and I said, well, because my show is about connecting the dots, mind, body, soul, and spirit, because I believe that we are a sum of all of those parts. And if any one of those parts is out of alignment, we feel it, So
Right.
we need to have our spiritual life and our emotional life and our physical life. Everything has to be, you have to pay attention to all of those different parts. So I wanted to do a show on spirituality, so I wrote a letter to Joel Osteen. I wanted to do one on literacy. I wrote to Barbara Bush, and so on. And that, I call it my day of crazy, because I sat down and I just wrote to all of these people. Within a week, I got a response from Joel Osteen that he would be a guest on my show. And that really opened the door for me. And from there on, I had the confidence to go after whomever I wanted. And now, I can pretty much get anyone I want. I'm pitched the best people. I'm part of all the media tours. So that was building that part of it. The second part was the magazine. I had the skills to produce it. I just needed to figure out how. Now, this was 10 years ago. My son wanted to be a graphic designer. He was in high school at the time. I said, listen, I'm giving you an allowance anyway. Design my magazine for me. Earn it. And my son started designing my magazine. I mean, we were a real shoestring budget here kind of operation. And from the time he was 15, he worked on my magazine.
Oh, I love that.
And
that's great.
Well, and we grew out of it. So, he has a full-time job. He's an art director for a company, but he still oversees the art for our publication. So that was how we executed that. Selling, I sell, I build the brand, I hire where I need to, and I do what I need to do. And that's one of the things that I've learned. If I didn't know how to do something, I figured it out. And I'm a person who is, there are no excuses. I don't make excuses, and I don't like to hear excuses. I think that if you don't know something, you learn it, or you figure out a way to get it done. But the fact that the dog ate the paper or something,
right.
I don't buy that. So
right.
I think that's just basically how we got this. I learned what I needed to learn, even with audio editing. In the very beginning, an engineer at the radio station taught me how to do it. In the early days, I did it all myself. So it's really just a matter of deciding what you want, figuring out how you're going to make that happen, learning all that you can about it, and then executing.
100%. And a couple of things just to piggyback. Of course, the relationships, so important. We speak about this a lot because, in my industry, in the mortgage industry, it is relationships because, anybody can do one mortgage loan, right? But if you bond proper relationships, whether it's through referral partners or whether it's with families, you can become that trusted advisor over and over and over again through generations, right? So not just one transaction, but as a relationship. Then the second key component that you mentioned is, you mentioned writing a letter to Joel Osteen. So what's the worst thing that could have happened, Joan, right? He didn't respond.
Right.
Or some generic response comes back saying, thank you so much for requesting. We're honored, but right now we're too busy. I mean, is that the worst thing that could have happened? So that is a true testament of, for everyone out there, regardless of what you're looking to do, whether it's growing your business or whether it's a new venture or whether it's just something fulfilling that you want to try, what's really the worst thing that's going to happen, right? A lot of times we are just, we have that fear or we have that sense of failure, but we all know that even if it is a failure, you learned, you grew, you went through something to get you to the next thing. So what is life if, like you mentioned earlier, what is life if we just wake up, fill our day with a bunch of individual things, and then we go to bed at night and it's just the same repeat every day? That's not living. That's just a waste of time. So yes, use that, no excuses, fulfill your life is a gift. It's a present. And yes, fill it every day with what you want to leave your legacy into this world, because that's what we're all provided with this gift. I love that.
I agree with you because, Laura, that's what I did. I got rid of the word failure. I don't believe in it because exactly like you said, I said to myself, what's the worst thing that can happen? And so you learn that it usually doesn't happen, first of all. And if it did, so what? Your life is exactly the same as it was. You've lost nothing. It's, fear is false evidence appearing real, and that's how I live my life, and I got rid of the word failure. There's no such thing. It's a lesson.
It's a lesson.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. Okay. So if you were going to give that one piece of advice, that one nugget of just, this is my biggest lesson that I learned, and maybe it is what you just said, but what's my biggest lesson that I learned that you're like, nope, I know I had to go through it because I had to get here, or I'm living my life this way going forward from this point on and sharing it with the world. What is that lesson?
It would absolutely be what I named the brand, change your attitude and change your life. And it really is getting your head in the game, because I didn't understand that I was the one that was limiting everything about myself. We have 60 to 70,000 thoughts every day. And 80% of those are negative, and 90% are the same thoughts from the day before. So if you think about that, until you change something in your way of thinking, nothing in your life is going to change. And that was my biggest problem. I didn't believe in myself. I didn't believe that I could accomplish anything. And I listened to my negative voices, and I listened to the negative voices of the people around me. When I started all of this, my husband at the time told me I was making a fool of myself and people were laughing at me. And although 90% of the people, 99% of the people were supporting me, I listened to that one voice. And because he was reinforcing what I already believed about myself. So if I could give someone any advice, it is to stop that negative self-talk, eliminate the negative things you tell yourself, and eliminate the negative voices that you allow in. Because once you're able to start to do that and change the way you talk to yourself, the way you believe about yourself, that's when everything in life changes for you.
Absolutely. Love that. Okay, Joan, how do people hear more? How do they follow? How do they find you? Please share so all the listeners can continue to hear your wisdom.
So I invite everyone to check out our website, which is cyacyl.com. It's the first letter of each word, change your attitude, change your life. So cyacyl.com. It's a hub of resources and information. On the site, you can read our magazine, you can listen to the podcast, you can learn from our life strategists, sign up for our mailing list. We really have built it to be a resource site to help people empower themselves so that they can live their best life now. So it's cyacyl.com, and you can listen to Conversations with Joan on all of your favorite podcast sites.
Awesome. Well, Joan, thank you so much. This has been truly energizing. I love everything that you're saying, and I fully support you. So thank you so much for joining us today. All the best.
Laura, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Positively Charged Biz. I'm Laura Brandeo, and we are here to motivate, inspire, and support our listeners as they write their life stories. If you have an inspiring story, please email me at laura@positivelycharged.biz. And remember to subscribe to hear more great guests. And connect to us on Facebook at Positively Charged and Instagram at Positively Charged Podcast. Until next time, we wish you a positive day.